Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frata Eleftheria. The last couple of weeks have been quite heavy in terms of my video content. You'll be pleased to know that this is going to be a more positive, uplifting video, talking about some things which offer us great hope in the midst of all of the darkness that we have witnessed recently. Before all of the Charlie Kirk stuff broke, two weeks or so ago, I was actually thinking about covering a very important topic, which was also breaking at that time, which was the recent congressional hearing on UAP that was happening in the US. I finally got around to watching the whole hearing from start to finish, all 2 hours worth and then some, and I was pretty blown away by it, to be honest. For decades, for as long as I've been alive in this world, and in fact longer, the official line that's peddled by the government, by the mainstream media, by Hollywood is, anybody who believes in UFOs or beings from somewhere outside of this world are just crackpots. They wear tinfoil hats and live in a trailer, and they're just a little bit kooky, and we shouldn't take them seriously because they haven't got a solid grasp on reality, and such things could never really exist. And there's no way that the government is covering up their existence. And now we have people from the military, from the intelligence community, under oath, before a congressional inquiry, admitting that these things, these UAP, these UFOs, whatever you want to call them, are in our skies and in our oceans, in fact, that the government, at least the US government, knows about them and can rule out the possibility that they have a human origin. Something else is responsible for this phenomenon. And the US government and other governments, perhaps the Russian government as well, and others, have gone to great lengths to keep everybody else in the dark about the fact that they know about these things, what they might know about these things. And to see that admitted in front of the world, on camera, broadcast to the whole world, by mainstream media, was just amazing. In fact, I think that this moment is epoch defining for the human race. Our official leaders are acknowledging that we have made contact with non-human intelligence. And this is going to be like how the boomers remember the moon landing, in my opinion. So if you don't know about it, you will after tonight. The congressional hearing on UAPs. I think this is actually the third one. There's some incredible stuff that gets covered in there. Matthew Brown was in the audience, who you'll be familiar with if you've watched my videos over the last few months. And he got on X afterwards and was talking about how essentially this has to be the beginning of holding government to account. And I really feel like what he was trying to do was push disclosure further, make sure that this moment of excitement surrounding the hearings doesn't just fizzle out, that we keep momentum going from the 9th of September into the future. And he tagged me in a couple of X posts to that effect. And so him and me both want to build upon the watershed moment that was the September 9 congressional hearing on UAP and take it further. And that's what the purpose of this video is going to be. I was thinking about what I could do to help this movement towards disclosure. I'm not in the US. It's not my government. Australia probably knows something about it, is doing something with it at Pine Gap, but I don't really know. But there are a few things that I can contribute to this conversation on disclosure to keep moving things forward. For one thing, I can use this platform, my YouTube channel, Lifting the Lamp, to promote the congressional hearing that we just had. I'll leave a link in the description below to the full hearing, and I highly recommend you watch it from start to finish. Become educated on this if you haven't already. It's a very important moment in human history, and we need to be paying attention to it and what the government does afterwards. Another thing I can do to continue on the disclosure movement, I suppose, to help it keep going along, is as an experiencer. I can give my own testimony about my own encounters, both physical and non-physical, with non-human intelligence. And I have done that already in the form of my video on the light beings and some other stuff kind of linking from that. So, I've done that. And I think one important thing about my own testimony to do with the orbs of light, to do with the fact that the physical encounter is just the tip of the iceberg with these things, that there's a lot of psychic communication that goes on around that as well. I think that testimony is important because it corroborates what a lot of other experiences say about how these beings interact with them. And so we start to build up the evidence that this thing is real and how it's been working. And that's something that I would hope I've been achieving already with what I've been saying about this topic over the last few weeks. But a third thing that I can do, I suppose, is draw upon my knowledge of all things weird and esoteric, or at least my knowledge of where to look to find out about such things. And having done that, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together, trying to shed light on what the phenomenon might be. Specifically, I've been directed, I feel, towards investigating the strong hints that have been dropped in various contexts, including the US government naming their UAP tracking program Immaculate Constellation, hints which point towards at least one type of UAP having an intelligence behind it which is identical to what earlier generations of human beings would have described as angels. And in this video tonight, I'd like to try and shed a bit more light on that because I've thought about it some more, and I feel like I've got to an answer now. Over the last few weeks, I've been spending quite a bit of time investigating this question and sort of being unsure, thinking, well, that might be true, but I really don't have enough evidence. Now I feel I have enough evidence to make a judgment call. But before I reveal the answer to you, I want to take you on the journey with me of connecting all the dots that I've connected to reach this conclusion. So the first thing that we can do to try and see if there's any connection between UAP and angels is by following the thread of human attempts to contact different types of non-human intelligence and see if there's any point of continuity between attempted contact of angels and that developing into contact of what are labeled as flying saucers or UFOs. So does such a point exist in the history of human spirituality? Well, surprisingly, it does. I'm talking about the Babylon working. I've touched a little bit upon the Babylon working before in my prior videos on this subject matter, talking about the ritual in the Mojave Desert and how there's a rumor in the occult world that was the reason for the flying saucer phenomenon that kind of exploded after that point, that what Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did when they were doing that ritual in the Mojave Desert, part of the Babylon working, was to rip a hole in space-time so these things could come in. But that's highly speculative. But, as I went back over the things that I knew about Jack Parsons, revisiting them after many years, because I don't care much for thelemic figures these days, I remembered again that there's a part of the story which provides an even more direct and striking link between our old attempts to contact angels on the one hand and the flying saucer or UFO phenomenon on the other. And that is because, as a result of the Babylon working, which involved in large part the use of the Enochian tables and Enochian calls, a form of angelic magic, one of the results of that working, if you will, was the appearance of a cigar-shaped UFO. It was Marjorie Cameron who saw it, his magical spouse, and Jack Parsons wrote in his journal at the time that it was confirmation that the Babylon working had been a success. So we have a direct link here between somebody using Enochian magic, a form of magic hundreds of years old that was traditionally used to contact angels, and the result of that magic being the appearance of a UFO, which strongly suggests that the interdimensional entities that Jack Parsons called upon by using Enochian magic manifested in the form of a UFO. This strongly suggests that whatever's behind the UFO phenomenon, at least in part, and what Jack Parsons was calling upon using Enochian magic are one and the same thing. Unfortunately, it's not that clear cut because Jack Parsons' Babylon working was a hodgepodge of different things, messily kind of cobbled together. So, he was calling upon elementals and thelemic gods and all sorts of things like that. So we can't say that angels are necessarily the only possibility. He was probably inviting a lot of different things in, but it leaves us with a pretty strong implication anyway. But if we want to rule out any other possibility, we need to really look and see if there's any other evidence pointing towards the UFO phenomenon and the phenomenon of seeing angels and communicating with angels having the same intelligence behind them. And there's such evidence there as well, which has been very usefully collated in the work of Diana Pasulka, as well as Chris Bledsoe, and also Jacques Vallée. Diana Pasulka's work is particularly fascinating. She began her research into accounts of Catholic miracles. And what she found eventually was that if you look at the stories of some of the miraculous events surrounding the saints, certain saints, you look at the original account of that before it was translated and changed, where it talks about, for example, seeing a vision of Christ or the Holy Spirit or an angel or something like that. In the original version of the vision, it's describing just a certain type of phenomenon, like a flame in the sky or a light or something like that. And in the original kind of untampered with form, many of the encounters that saints had, which now get described as encounters with angelic beings or with Christ, bear remarkable resemblance to modern UAP reports. So, you had these saints like Teresa of Avila, for example, who lived a holy life, always praying, always trying to get close to God. And as a result of that, things appear which get described through the Catholic lens as angels, which bear remarkable resemblance to UAP. She talks about that in American Cosmic. She talks about how the Fatima visitations, the Fatima visions were actually consistent with a UAP encounter. The way the sun fell out of the sky and was moving around, really sounds like the description of a light orb. And so we see these things surrounding religious experiences and playing the same role that angels play. And in his book, UFO of God, Chris Bledsoe talks about his own orb encounters and how he met with Diana Pasulka. And she said that his encounters with orbs were consistent with accounts of angels and encounters with angels. And she has an interesting discussion as well in there with Bledsoe about the translation of the word cloud in the Bible and how it might, be a mistranslation of a word that was really describing a more otherworldly phenomenon, perhaps even similar to an orb, so that when we hear accounts of the cloud accompanying the Israelites when they left Egypt in the book of Exodus, the cloud descending down on Mount Sinai to deliver the law to Moses, or the cloud descending above the tabernacle in the book of Exodus, we might actually have a description of a UAP that has been described as a cloud. That word cloud gets used as a placeholder for what the phenomenon really is. And this is fascinating because anytime you see the mention of a cloud in the Bible, it is a symbol of God's presence revealing itself in a very physical way. And in fact, one of the signs of the return of Christ was the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. So when these things appear, it really is a sign that, God is opening a new chapter in the great plan for humanity. I've spoken about how the Christmas star, the Star of Bethlehem in the New Testament, resembles a UAP in one of my previous videos, drawing upon some of the stuff that Jacques Vallée talks about. And Jacques Vallée talks about how what we describe today as UFOs or UAP in modern parlance is really just a reinterpretation of a much older phenomenon that used to be described in terms of jinn or angels or fairies. And, the line can get a bit blurred sometimes between all these different names for the phenomenon. I think for me, the thing that would distinguish the phenomenon as something angelic rather than anything else is the fact that the appearance of the phenomenon has got something to do with helping humanity to reach a new level of understanding, to reach a more humane civilization or something like that, as opposed to just being like a trickster spirit. But I think there's tons of examples of UAP type phenomena doing just that and behaving in ways that are consistent with angelic encounters that are described throughout the ancient texts. So I think when you put all of that together, yes, I think it does start to look a lot like this particular type of UAP, this orb of light that appears and has a benevolent influence on us, is in fact one and the same with angels, with what we would have once described as angels. And that's truly mind-blowing. So psychologism is dead. When people had encounters with angels, it wasn't just some inner psychological process that was unfolding. These entities really exist, and they've really been interacting with us throughout history. And we're used to describe them as angels, and that gives us a clue as to what their plan is, what kind of influence they have had on our history, and why they might be here again. And so all of this information, all of this research is very convincing. But for me, the real final confirmation that the light orb UAPs are angels is something that comes from my own personal revelatory experience. That to me is the real clincher. As part of this process of contemplation of the phenomenon and how it might relate to angels, I went back over my journals from when I was doing the Jebafol ritual, very intensive 49-day Enochian ritual back in the day, and reading over some of my angelic communications that I received in that ritual, which I thought might bring me closer to the answer. And There's one in particular that I want to share with you. It gives a very clear answer to our question. So this is the journal that I wrote in. I conducted the Jebafol ritual in 2014 to 2015. And I had my CE5 experiences, my encounters with the light being UAPs in early 2014, very early 2014. So that's the chronology. So just keep that in mind. What I'd like to share with you is my vision of the second ether, the ether of An. That's what we're looking at here. And, it begins with some quite vivid visions of kind of ultraviolet horizon, like looking at the globe of the Earth from space as the sun's coming up, but it's all in ultraviolet. Another image of a giant eye, which was opening and closing, and every time it opened, it was a different eye color. All these kinds of visions, and then there's a voice that starts to speak. And it's a comforting voice. It's basically telling me to take comfort in the eternal, that the divine loves us, that the divine purifies us with its love, which is eternal, that the voice in the vision, which is the voice of an angel, starts giving me some proofs of the divine's love for me, and starts giving me a litany of proofs in my own life that demonstrate that fact. So it says, "You have been shown the future full of hope." This is a reference to another divinatory result that I'd got, where it showed me that in spite of everything that was going on in the world and how dark things were, that the future of humanity was hopeful. It says, "You know the power that lies within yourself," a reference to some of the positive results that I'd got using magic. "You have seen that there is nothing that can't be accomplished by the light." So the litany goes on like this. The very first example that the angel gives me is this one, and I quote, "You have seen my lights traverse the skies." That is a direct reference to the orbs of light that I saw following the CE5 protocols. And it was giving me this message pretty much on the anniversary of that event, which is something I just realized now, looking at the date of the vision. So that's quite remarkable. And, I wrote this down, and initially, I thought, nah, can't really mean that. It's got to be metaphorical. Like, that experience is something that made me feel a profound sense of love and comfort. Therefore, it symbolizes the divine's love for me, that this angel is trying to point out. But I think that my rational mind, was in denial of the literal meaning of this verse, which is that "you have seen my lights traverse the skies." And this indicates ownership. It's not the Grey's lights. It's not Satan's lights. It is an angel from the second ether saying, "You have seen my lights traverse the skies." My lights. The lights that come from the angelic world. So it's right there, plain as day. The intelligence that I was communicating with during my Enochian rituals was the same intelligence that sent me the orbs of light. So there you have it. That to me is the ultimate proof. I have a lot of faith and conviction in what was written down in these particular communications as being true in a way that I couldn't even fathom with my mortal brain. So to me, this is the ultimate proof. And maybe the answer to this question seems obvious to a lot of people. I mean, a couple of people that I've spoken to are like, well, yeah, of course it's the same thing. Of course angels and UAP are the same thing. I realized that ages ago. I've known it for ages. I guess my brain just works differently. Most people have a brain that uses top-down processing. They see the bigger picture and they're able to fill in the gaps and infer the answer from that. I mean, I can do that, but if I want to get a conclusion that I'm certain is the right one, or I'm certain I haven't misinterpreted anything, I will look at all the individual data points and consider everything before developing a conclusion from that. And that's really what I've had to go through. That's the process I've had to go through to convince myself that the light orb UAP and the angels of the past are one and the same thing. So this is angelic disclosure. The angels are here. We have evidence that they're here. What does this mean for the human race? What are the implications of this? I want to give some thoughts on that. So to some extent, this phenomenon is wide open for interpretation. This has led to attempts at hijacking the narrative by members of the intelligence community and other factions and things like that of powerful people. But, even with power struggles and things like that aside, it's just human nature to interpret a very unusual phenomenon through our own cultural and philosophical lens to try and make sense of it. But bearing all that in mind, I'm going to tell you what I think the key takeaway is of the reality of this phenomenon, knowing full well that I might have my own filters, but, still thinking about how this knowledge can be of the most benefit to the human race. So first of all, I think that the reality of the light beings, of the angels, it shatters the dominant paradigm that we've lived under for the past couple of centuries that has ruled the human mind, or at least the Western mind, for the past 2 centuries, which is that we live in a material universe. Everything can be explained with science. If science can't explain something, it doesn't exist. And so all the stories in the past about fairies and angels and demons and things like that, they're all just based on either delusion, like people were hallucinating or something, or they're just based on sheer fantasy because somebody made them up and they were intended as a metaphor or something like that, or some kind of psychological projection or something like that. And that has to be the answer, because we know that such things couldn't literally exist. And so that's the paradigm that we've lived under, and that's shattered now. The reality of these beings of light, which has been admitted in Congress, in a congressional hearing no less, or a series of them, invites us to revisit our assumptions about reality, and perhaps revisit the idea that the way that our distant ancestors looked at the world might actually be a more accurate portrayal in some respects of our place in the universe. But maybe we need to take ownership of that again. Maybe we need to realize that there are these celestial beings that have been with us from the beginning, and that there is a divine plan that we are being guided to unfold throughout the history of civilization with their help. And we once understood that, and we lost sight of it. We became proud and intellectually arrogant, and we believed that if we can't see it and feel it, if there's not readily accessible and measurable evidence of something, it doesn't exist. Now we're being called to rediscover that connection with the other world, and that deeper sense of meaning about what we're really here for that goes along with that. And this is similar to what Diana Pasolka describes as the re-enchantment of our world. I think that another consequence of angelic disclosure is that it helps us to dispel our fear of the unknown somewhat. Most of the messaging that we get about alleged human contact with NHIs, with non-human intelligence, is negative. We get given stories about the Greys abducting people and doing experiments on them, or we get stories of the shadow people, paralyzing people in their beds and looming over them, or we get stories about, the reptilians who can shape shift and take the form of powerful people and are trying to enslave the human race, and all these nightmarish scenarios involving non-human intelligence that create a great amount of fear in us. But when we understand the reality of the light beings, we understand the flip side of that. We understand that there are some things out there that are interdimensional in nature, that have an influence on our world, which are in fact a positive influence. They're here to help us, and that can help to dispel some of that fear. Thirdly, I think that this knowledge empowers us. One thing to keep in mind about the light beings is that this is something, this phenomenon, that no government or military on Earth is able to control. We had footage in the recent hearing on UAP where it showed footage of an orb of light. It may well have been one of these light beings. And anyway, a military drone fires a Hellfire missile at it. The missile just bounces off it, and the thing keeps going like it's nothing. So, no military in the world is going to be able to repress these things. And I think that the governments of the world understand that, because that's a big part of the reason, I think, why they haven't revealed that these things exist up until now, because it really demonstrates the powerlessness of the military forces of the world, that they can't even protect their own airspace from these things appearing in and out. At the moment, the NATO countries are worried about the message it might send if they don't respond the right way to Russian jets going through NATO airspace. So what kind of a message does it send that these UAP are moving in and out of our airspace constantly without any consequences? And so it can be comforting to know that there is something that is a benevolent form of intelligence that wants the best for us and is more powerful than the governments of this world, which more often than not are just there to make our lives more difficult and keep us down, unfortunately. But they're not all powerful, and that is a very comforting thought. We're constantly on the brink of World War III, and yet there's these things flying around that can just shut off our nuclear weapons. So at least to me, that's a very comforting thought. Now, none of that is to say that these things are here to save us, that we should rely on these things to save us. We have to be the ones who do the work. We have to be the ones who step into our own moment of spiritual evolution, which I believe is upon us now. But the last bit of empowering knowledge we are left with as we contemplate this phenomenon, I would argue, is to do with our own power, our own potential. You see, we're getting more and more examples of human-initiated contact. This is something that really took off with the C5 protocol of Dr. Stephen Greer, but that's not the only form that it takes. We have this new idea that contact with these beings can be initiated by us. And the way that we do that is essentially through sending out a telepathic signal and them responding to it. And the fact that this can work at all is itself very liberating. It demonstrates that we're not as bound by the laws of physics as we thought, that this thing that's happening is a non-local phenomenon. You're sending a signal out into deep space and then getting almost instantaneous results. If you send a radio signal, it will take years to travel. So this is a non-local phenomenon outside the limitations of time and space. And it is our own abilities, our own innate abilities that make it possible. we're able to establish the line of communication. We're able to manifest these things. So we have a lot more power than we realize when we start to delve into the spiritual side of our nature. And that is something that the government can't control either. We can talk to God ourselves, and we can get an answer from God, and we can receive guidance from God for the benefit of humanity, to guide us into a brighter future. And that is the note that I would like to finish on, because that is where I think all of this is leading. So a lot to think about, and a lot of knowledge to bring forward into fruition, into understanding, as we enter the next phase of disclosure. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to this channel to support my work. Oh, and make sure that when you do subscribe, you hit the notification bell, because YouTube doesn't always tell people when I've got new videos. And if you want to give me extra support, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.